Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be a little bit torn to this microphone here, actually, because unfortunately we really confused the conference people. We said two of us from Learn Direct want to come and talk to you about games today, because normally only allow one of us on the stage. But I'm sort of the warm-up act, really, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to do the really sexy stuff and really talk to you about a really important pilot that we've done involving serious games-based learning. You'll have also been given one of these, and it's your opportunity to play a bit of a game with us later on in this presentation, but all will become clear. But one of the reasons I wanted to sort of talk for a few minutes before handing over to Sarah was really to sort of make the point that Learn Direct is a business. We provide learning and training to a very large market. In fact, 2.5 million learners have been on our online learning. So if I pause for a second and let that figure stick in your minds, 2.5 million learners, then actually it's a real business for us. This is not just a piece of R&D, although R&D is an incredibly important part of our evolution, but this is about us really trying to look at new ways in which we're going to be able to engage with our learners for the future. And one of the reasons we have to do that is that we know that times are changing, use of the internet, the world of Web 2.0, the dynamics that the digital natives, the digital immigrants, there's a lot of force and pressure coming upon us in the learning industry, and a lot of real opportunity to try and seize that, to try and actually look at how we can embed new and different ways to learn. We also know there's been a lot of heated debate in the last sort of 10 years about the different modes of learning, from the traditional styles of teaching right through to the sort of more informal structures. And we ourselves at Learn Direct are sort of grappling with how we move from what are sort of the more traditional e-learning courses, if you can call e-learning traditional, into the sort of more informal social collaboration of learning. And some of the factors affecting that is actually what's happening in what we call digital Britain and the whole convergence of technology. We now know that 62% of adults are online. We're spending more time online, 24 hours a week, I believe, online, as opposed to 17 hours watching television. So I think that's very interesting. We know that 15 to 24-year-olds, the internet and the world of the web is actually how they live their lives. It's not just some technology tool they see that they play with. It's actually they live their lives through the internet. And that actually provides some very socio and economic challenges and problems for us, but also some very interesting opportunities. At Learn Direct, what we want to try and do is use the notion of gaming as a serious platform in which we can actually then maximise on the things that are happening on the web to really use it as an engagement tool. And we think that gaming is as much about the learning it can deliver as it is the way you can actually engage your audience. Products such as Brain Training, since its launch a year ago, it's sold something like over 5 million, been phenomenal in really mainstreaming gaming. We now know that there are over 500 million gamers worldwide. So gaming is becoming now not for geeks in bedrooms, and apologies for any of you still playing games in the bedrooms, excuse the pun, but it definitely is very much a mainstream activity. Now moving on, having mentioned brain training, this is the moment you get to use your brain. I just mentioned a statistic there, which was 500 million gamers worldwide. I'm interested to know if you've got a view of how many of those of that population are women who are playing games. So what percentage of game players do you think are women? Vote now. I'll give you a few seconds to vote and we'll see what happens. I'm looking around the audience, and interestingly, we think there's about a 60-40 split. 60% of you are men and 40% are women. So it's quite an interesting audience we've got. But keep voting, and I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what's happened. That should close the poll. Well done. 41%. If you said 38%, that is the right answer. But actually, we were really quite amazed when we got that sort of research back, that 38% are women over the age of 18 are playing games, as opposed to men under 17. I thought that was quite an interesting characteristic and fact, and actually I think is probably measured by the success of games such as brain training. Indeed, I know my own sister-in-law, who currently actually doesn't work and hasn't worked for many years, and in fact raises a young family, doesn't actually have to work, so she's in that fortunate position. She's loved playing brain training because it's actually given her back some worth in terms of testing out her own ability and testing out her intellects, and I think people really like that sort of opportunity. There's the right answer coming forward. So the next generation of of learning, and I think actually I'd say that it's not necessarily the next generation of learning, it's learners that are here today. And very much the pilot that Sarah's going to go on and talk to you about, that very much demonstrated the fact that learners today are expecting to be able to move from the formal, structured learning into much more informal learning, the opportunity to share their learning experiences, the opportunity to create new learning themselves and then share it with other groups. And I don't know if any of you were in the session this morning that Donald Clark ran on social collaboration, and Josie talked about all those interesting statistics, but there is no doubt that that world of social collaboration and people learning together and with each other is a very, very powerful force of learning, and we shouldn't just see it as informal learning. It is real learning that's actually taken place. So at Learn Direct, we're very much moving across that chart now from long training interventions done largely in isolation through e-learning into much more multimodal delivery and actually the opportunity to network and collaborate. However, it's really important that if we are looking at gaming in that context, that there's got to be some kind of framework. We can't just create a game that looks good and sort of does witty power things, but actually there's got to be some conceptual framework behind it. And this actually is a conceptual framework that we've borrowed, with permission, I hasten to add, from Caspian Learning. It's been inputted in by people like Donald Clark and Clive Shepherd. But actually what this does is give us 3 different sort of styles of gaming that we can sort of hang a pedagogical model off to make sure that there is some real learning built into the game. You've got 3D worlds, and the most famous of which is Second Life, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about Second Life later on this afternoon. But Second Life, where you can really become someone else, you can really personalise, you can explore, you can work with others. Then you've got simulations that we know work very, very well in aviation and military environments, but the critical thing about simulations, and that features a lot in the game you're going to see from Sarah in a moment or two, is that it's safe to fail. You can create context where it's okay to try, fail, try again. And then there's games, sort of, popular commercial high street games. But what's really, really interesting, and what was really interesting for us with this kind of conceptual model, is when this happens. And those 3 circles and those 3 styles collide. And actually what you get then is the multiplicity of all of those different delivery modes coming together. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really understanding your target market and your target audience, and then which one of these styles or which combination of these styles, which was our experience, is going to work best for that target audience. So just on a final note, I'd like to just leave you with 3 very quick thoughts before we actually go and see this in practice. We believe at Learn Direct that actually the time is right now to introduce serious gaming into the learning world. There is an opportunity to make real business cases, and there is an opportunity to see a return on investment. And that learning isn't just about games learning isn't just about the learning you do in the game, but it can also be used as a very effective tool for engagement. Thank you. Sarah.
Hi. Whereas Kirsty's talked very much about a kind of conceptual framework, I wanted to share with you a product that we created. It's actually a virtual work experience. And what we did was we actually set a number of realistic tasks that somebody might complete in either an office or a production factory in this virtual world of work experience. And I think it's worth just taking a moment to work out kind of why we did that. One of the key things that we wanted to create is give unemployed people, as part of our employability offer, an opportunity to get into virtually a world of work that they have no access to at the moment. And that was for 2 reasons, really. It's about improving their kind of confidence and feeling comfortable in a world that they haven't got access to at the moment. And to do this, we actually teamed up with a company called Caspian Learning. And part of the reason we chose them was that we wanted to have this rapid development tool that they have. Because as Kirsty said, our scale of delivery is quite big, and what we actually wanted was the opportunity to deliver this stuff quite quickly and quite reasonably if this pilot was successful, and we wanted to ramp it up. I'll just take a moment now to show you the game before I go any further. Just a sec. Excuse me, I've just lost it briefly. I'm sorry, I'm trying to start a demo, and this worked beautifully a minute ago when we were doing it. There we are. Nope. Sorry, at this rate we'll have seen most of the presentation. I'm sure I'm double-clicking rightly.
One click.
One click. Here we go. Finally, what we do here is that the person can go in and actually select an avatar, so they can play the game as the particular avatar they've selected. And we've got about 6 there, and that was just a really simple level of personalisation that we included. Here we're in a kind of virtual work centre where they can talk to other learners. Hello. And see a bit of an introduction.
I'm the managing director, Tony.
It's my pleasant task to welcome you to our company.
And here, this is part of the office production area. They can talk to people, they can go in, they can find out what people do. And later on, they use that knowledge by going forward in the future on the teleporter to actually start some discrimination tasks where they get given certain articles that they have to hand out to people having gone round and get them. So it's actually just an element of gameplay that's included in this kind of simulation of an actual physical, realistic task they will complete. And here they're now in the production area, and here we do some realistic things. We might give them a worksheet. We say that one of the hoppers has run out of oats, for example, that may need to be filled up, and it's about doing it to the right quality, finding the right ingredients, manual handling issues, taking it over there, finding the crane, are you equipped to use it or not? And actually there's consequences. For example, if you get it wrong, then the production line stops because you filled it with the wrong ingredient and the biscuits being produced aren't right. So it's actually about giving them realistic tasks, and actually an office and production setting is exactly where this target audience might rejoin the world of work. So I've talked a little bit about our target audience. Traditionally, games have been very much aimed at these sorts of guys. So the military have used them heavily, professional organisations, engineers have been trained, doctors, and actually it's about where things have been too costly and the skills required before actually somebody gets on there. So too costly or too dangerous to actually let somebody on without training. Our target audience is significantly different. They might be people who are just about to be released from prison, they might be lone parents returning to work, or they may be people who are on inactive benefits. And the one thing they have in common is they're not actively engaged with learning, they probably had a pretty bad experience of learning in the past, so we need to re-engage them with the whole learning process. Their levels of literacy and numeracy are generally quite low, so we had to consider that during the design process as well. And just to go back to the kind of conceptual diagram, the actual demonstration of the game I've just showed you is pretty much positioned there. So as I talked about, we have a level of personalisation, there's a 3D world to explore, and most importantly, it's a context that people don't have access to, that they can go to. It's a safe environment to practice their skills. But what we probably haven't got enough in, and this is something that we kind of found out or sort of evolved over the design process, was that probably there's a bit in there about kind of there's some motivational stuff, there's some competition, but there's probably not enough. And actually, I'll talk a little bit later about how we might go back and redesign this to actually involve some of those things. So it's actually positioned there, and I think in the end, we'll actually kind of move the arrow more this way, to be picking up some of those kind of real game-based learning stuff. But it's quite difficult because when you're actually focusing on this need to get the context right and get kind of realistic work tasks, it's quite difficult to actually get that bit in as well. So for example, we have things around, you've got a time task, you've got 2 minutes to go and do something, come back, your mentor tells you how you're doing, you go off, you might have to explain something to somebody, come back, sort it out. And there's a kind of game-based sort of play there, but I don't think we brought it out enough. Again, at the beginning, we made very linear tasks, so you kind of do this, move on to this, move on to this. And I think actually we then went on to much more game-based, kind of going down different routes, being kicked out, going back up to the start again, and that learners responded really, really well to. With this group, there is a kind of IT confidence issue, so in a way you need to combine the very simple tasks where they can't get lost with some more complex ones at the end when they're more confident. When we developed this game, part of the thing was to take it out to our learner group and test it. So we took it out, and what we found is that game-based learning doesn't suit everybody. There are some people who it just doesn't suit their learning style, they can't see benefit from it, and it just didn't suit them. But for those people who it was effective for, it was actually a very, very effective way to learn. So one of the things we asked people was we wanted to find out whether it was an effective learning style. So we said to people, as part of the kind of wider employability programme, as you start your learning, kind of what's your perception of how near you feel to the labour market? How ready to work do you feel? And we came out at a kind of score. Then they did an employability programme, which is about 30 hours, and it involved some classroom stuff, some traditionally learning, some CDs with case studies and things like that on. And we asked them again, and then we asked them again when they completed the game. So we actually asked them at 3 points. It was a very small, under 50 people, qualitative study. And what it actually did was we just looking for some confidence going forward in terms of what we did. And in that, there was a shift in terms of how close to the labour market people felt and how ready to work. And a significant part of that shift was attributed to the game. when people were actually doing the game, if they liked it, they showed really high levels of motivation. You know, we were asking people whether they wanted to stop for tea breaks, things like that. People were just motivated to play the game again and again. And what people were reporting was that they really liked the fact that it was this fail-safe environment. They weren't very confident, the world of work was quite alien to them, and what it gave was a really safe place for them to practice their skills and make mistakes, because with this group, they're really, really scared about making mistakes and someone seeing them. As I say, people replay tasks, and that was, again, something that we found out with a lot of our Skills for Life learners. People are very happy to go back, either to get the right outcome or to get a better outcome from last time, or just to see whether they can do it quicker than the time before. And the last one was people like the personalisation element. And in reality, when we look at this again, that'll be something we bring out, maybe use personalisation, much like Second Life does in a way, to bring out, you know, you could personalise your avatar, get rewards for it, and actually bring it into part of the gameplay. In terms of the stuff we found that was less positive, accessibility. Games are incredibly visual by nature. There's some audio included in the games as well, and actually that means that someone with a visual impairment who may use a magnifier or require a really high contrast on the screen, it's really difficult for them to use the game. And rather than actually look to kind of squeeze the game into the kind of accessibility needs that we have and the legal compliance we have, we actually think that we will be using it in a way where we'll produce a second version, and that second version will allow learners who don't respond well to this kind of gameplay to have access to that learning, and also allow these learners. Now, a very simple question, and it's a little bit high, but the question is, and I want you to take a vote here, so which of these groups liked the product least? And I was quite surprised at this response. We've kind of grouped them together under men under 25 years, women under 25 years, and then men and women over 25 years. So if I give you a few seconds. Okay, I'm going to close voting now. No, it was actually the under 25 year group, but it was women who were most critical of the game. And interestingly enough, we kind of did an analysis of our kind of results on the under 25s and the over 25s and by gender as well. And actually, it's slightly misleading, the answer to that, because actually it was the under 25 group and women. So women over and under 25 and the under 25 men and women who were most critical. And interestingly enough, the reason they were most critical is they were comparing it really unfavourably to this sort of commercial game that they were playing. And in a way, it's kind of an unfair comparison, because for a start, the relative investment levels. You know, you've got something here where it's probably, you know, the average game is taking 2 years to produce at a cost of about 10 million, whereas we produced ours in a kind of time frame of 4 to 5 months with, you know, a budget that was comparable to kind of top-end e-learning. So, you know, it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but that's the comparisons that's being made. And the other one, of course, is about the fact that this is purely entertainment, whereas ours is actually kind of, you know, to achieve a learning outcome. And sometimes we felt we were getting potentially negative feedback based on the fact that it was too realistic and that it kind of woke people up to the fact that they had to return to work and that was the sort of thing they'd have to do while they were there. So it was kind of a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes. Of course, we look at this and we look at the graphical fidelity comparing this to the game we produced, and actually there is no, you know, they are significantly different. But of course, brain training, which Kirsty mentioned earlier, that's 2D graphics, you know, completely away from this kind of high graphical fidelity. But that's really popular because it taps into the motivation element. And I think that's really, you know, it's something to remember. If you get the application right, then in a way, and the graphical fidelity right, sorry, the psychological fidelity right, then the graphical fidelity actually becomes less important. And it also struck me that, you know, people are comparing, for example, a training video. They don't compare it to a Hollywood blockbuster. And is it actually about positioning it? Did we, when we were calling people over in the pilot saying, hey, do you want to have a go at this game, should we have positioned it as an opportunity to practice some skills in a workplace or something like that? It just occurs to me that there's, you know, it's about setting expectation, and people don't not watch training videos because they're not Hollywood blockbusters. So is it just about positioning it right? And I think to go on to what we learnt from it, I think the clearest thing to go back to this diagram is it's got to have a clear purpose, and you've got to be clear about what the focus and purpose is, which will then allow you to use this sort of conceptual framework to make a decision about what you want to do. So, for example, is it about engagement, overcoming some natural resistance to learning? Is it actually about knowledge acquisition, in which case is context really important? Would this be the right approach? Or is it about practice and consolidation? And if so, what are your actual outcomes to be achieved? And I think it's the last one that we actually see the real strength of game-based learning in. Another key lesson we learned was to get the right project team on it. So traditionally, we'd have the instructional designer, a subject matter expert, and a project manager, and actually a games technologist needed to be in there. And at the beginning, we thought the games technologist might mean that we didn't need an instructional designer anymore, but actually they have quite different skill sets. You need a games technologist because they need to know what the game can do, which a traditional sort of instructional designer designing e-learning doesn't know. So you would need both those elements. And the last one is, or the next one about the costs is, depending on how complex the game is and the focus and purpose for the game, actually will have an impact on budget. Because the more complex the game and the higher you go into gaming or the kind of sort of simulation of tasks, then it will get more expensive. And it will also have an impact on your timescales as well. And interestingly enough, we found this, having done a lot of kind of e-learning, that actually the timescales, the sort of project management, testing, reviewing element of game-based learning is actually much higher because it's more difficult to test, it's more difficult to review scripts, because actually it's all this conceptual stuff on screen rather than a more linear tutorial. Going forward, I think there's an opportunity to refine this game. We were on a very steep learning curve when we worked with Caspian to do it, and I think we would look to potentially take this to a more audio-based, remove some of the text on screen. Some of our learners, they were okay when they were doing stuff that was involving in the scenario, but we put too much instruction text up, and we would have that very much on a kind of more reveal as they do the task, rather than telling them up front. I think that was us being a little bit traditional in our approach and not taking it far enough down the gaming route. We're going to explore multi-platform delivery because at the moment a lot of our learners are doing this in centres. We actually want them to be able to take it home and do it. So we're actually breaching the engagement element, being able to do it in your home, delivered through various mediums. And the last one is the couple of areas we're looking at, particularly as Skills for Life in terms of some rapid-fire games, practicing reinforcement, but also ESOL. So once you, for example, have learned a vocabulary, you might go out and, for example, experience shopping or explore a virtual town and use that vocabulary and opportunity to practice. Thank you.